Well, I just primarily on graduation. Usually on the next one. They were in toys. Really? I didn't take it personally. There was sometimes they all have their one of them. There was occasions.
I'm the little guy. Yeah, I feel really bad against that guy.
That's good. It deserves it. But my wife was retired. She was there's some when I retired.
How are you?
Not bad, and yourself? Because every night, it's a duty of a hunter. That's to sit there and not say anything. I learned that the hard way. Well, here's what you do. And still fall into that sometimes. And it's like, I forgot, it's a song.
How you doing? Pretty good. And yourself?
Hey, doing great, thank you. You just want to sit there like you get hard. And then you hear the other room. The sports channel, the sports guy got it, and your head's like this. And you're saying to yourself, eye contact, eye contact.
My wife and I both.
Keep it eyes on.
Yeah. We did them all. Those things. I think education is. Aspect mine and the first one. So I came in early to get there. Exactly.
Worry about temptation. Temptation.
It's an excellent career. Well, and first of all, thank you. Are you oh, I hope the commercial we support it. Yeah, you know, I've been 3 years. I'm doing
Good.
You should be so. That's probably.
Would kindly take your seats. We'll get started as soon as everyone's settled in a seat, please. Ladies, would you like to take a seat, please? Can you find a place to sit? Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janet Garrity Saucier. I'm a former vice president. Pardon me? How about I yell? I'll do that. I'm Janet Garrity Saucier. I'm a former vice president of the board. And my colleague is Mary Freudenberg, a former president of the board. And we're going to be your moderators today for the 2024 Board Candidate Forum. And we welcome all the audience members here, as well as those that are online watching today. We'd also like to welcome our 4 board candidates. To begin, I've been asked to share with you how this afternoon's forum is going to go. The questions that Mary and I will be asking the candidates were sent to the admin office by CFPOA members specifically for this forum. I do want to make a note, and there's a but, so bear with me. Please note that because this is a board of directors related event, and in light of the ongoing litigation, Mary and I will not be asking questions about short-term rentals, but audience members are going to be welcome to ask such questions at the end during the Q&A, which will be time limited because we're going to stop right at 6 o'clock. We've got good 2 hours here. So, as I said, you'll be welcome to ask any questions at the end. And I'm going to ask you now to please remember to go to the mic in the middle of the room so that everyone can hear your question, as well as the candidates. The upcoming board elections for candidates are Dave Hunter, Dan Mabey, Larry Rourke, and Richard Zollinger. The gentlemen are seated in alphabetical order, and that's the order in which each will make his opening remarks. Should any of the candidates wish to make initial comments that include anything about the short-term rentals, they may do so in their opening statements, and those statements are limited to 5 minutes maximum. Who will be asked the first moderator's question will be rotated, and the next person in the alphabetical order will follow, and so forth throughout. Each candidate's answer to the community's questions are limited to 3 minutes. After we've completed, as I said before, after we've completed the community questions, time permitting, members in the audience will be able to ask questions by going to the mic in the middle of the room. Please introduce yourself to the candidate and ask your question either to all the candidates or particular candidates. And we'd like to stay within that 3-minute time period for the candidates' answers at that time as well. So people can ask their questions and we can all go home and have a cocktail. So everyone, thank you in advance. Thank you in advance for participating in this year's board candidate forum. And I want to say, let's make it an informative and an enjoyable experience for all. So we will begin the 5-minute opening statements, starting with Dave Hunter, followed by Dan, then Larry, and then Richard. So Dave.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice seeing everyone here at the Cherokee Room. I want to thank Janet and Mary for moderating this session and for also passing to me the questions in advance of today's meeting. Thank you, Mary and Janet. I appreciate that. Just kidding, guys. My name is Dave Hunter. I am a candidate for the CFPOA Board of Directors. My wife Donna and I moved here 12 years ago, but our roots go much deeper than that. My parents lived here from 1984 to 2011. And so my family has been associated with Conisty Falls for 40 years. My father actually served as board president back in the mid-90s. Each of us, when we came here today, drove through some portion of Conisty Falls. In our case, we drove over from Enola Court, and we drove on the best maintained roads in Western North Carolina. And we drove through wonderful mountains with forests, with 20 miles of trails built by volunteers and maintained by stewards. We drove past one of our 4 lakes. We drove past a lot of beautiful homes. We drove past a cluster of amenities, pickleball court, pool, bocce court, beautiful golf course, lovely clubhouse. And we parked in the shadow of a brand new state-of-the-art 12,000 square foot activity and wellness center that we will open in the very near future. We love this place. That's why we serve. I served 2 years as board president, 2019, 2020. I served as treasurer. I served 4 years on the finance committee. I was a member of the branding and marketing task force. I chaired the build out task force at the request of the board. My wife in her time here has served as president of the Conisty Art League. All the good that happens here happens as a result of volunteers and staff. Generations of boards, permanent committees, task forces, and so forth have dedicated countless hours to making Conisty Falls what it is today. You know, those same groups that I just mentioned, tennis, bocce, golf, pickleball, others, routinely provide fundraising activities for the scholarship fund. Many of you were here last Friday night when we had casino night and once again raised funds for the scholarship fund. These are the things that make Conisty Falls great. And as our community continues to grow and evolve, it's going to face any number of challenges, and it's going to take engaged board leadership with pretty strong institutional knowledge to help us navigate that growth. And that I ask for your support, and I look forward to answering your questions today. Thank you.
Is that? Okay. I'm so sorry. I'm going to introduce you one more time because some people just came in. Our 4 board candidates today are Dave Hunter, who you caught the tail end of his opening statement. Dan, I'm so sorry, Dan Mady, Larry Rourke, and Richard Zollinger. And they are in the process of making their opening statements, which are to the last 5 minutes. Dan, would you like to go ahead?
Good afternoon, everyone. And Janet, thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I always tell people it's I-Mady. That's how you can get my name correct. What you would get from me as a board member, what I will be pushing for is increased transparency in terms of community input, accountability, and making sure that we're going to preserve what we have and that we're being fiscally responsible. My candidacy was born on really out of concern and disappointment. And I'll get to that in a moment. I love Coniston Falls. I've put myself out there, as many of you know, I've made myself very vulnerable. I didn't have to do that. I love Coniston Falls. I could have lived anywhere after I retired, and my wife and I chose to be here. What I love most about the community is the sense of generosity and hospitality of the community. I will never forget how I felt these past 2 summers before I went to Poland to work with Ukrainian refugees for a week, just outside of Warsaw. 2 years ago, many of you supported me financially to do that. I'm unbelievably grateful that you did that. Last year, I asked for donations for school clothes, school supplies, things along those things, sports equipment. And I got about 400 pounds of equipment from you all that I mailed over to Poland. And it was such a joy last July to see those kids using all of that gear. So thank you so much. I'll never be able to repay any of you for that. I'm concerned and disappointed, wherever you stand on the short-term rental issue. To me, I hope you've gotten my overall point that that's not the main issue, whether you're for it or whether you're against it. One of the board operating principles is that we're supposed to balance competing interests of the membership. And we're supposed to have input for something this grave, something of this seriousness, that we didn't have greater input on. This really concerns me, and I'm really disappointed that that didn't happen. That's the main reason why I'm up here. Again, where you stand on the issue is not the major concerns me. I know there are people that are for them. I know people are against them. One of the guiding principles I learned as a 19 years old, as a young Marine officer candidate, keep people informed. As I put out there in my video, when a 10,000 man organization trusted me to change a leadership program, a mentorship program, I could have issued out edicts or resolutions like were done in 16 minutes at a meeting without input. Okay. I didn't do that. I brought together groups of people because I knew that's not the way that we're supposed to do things. And I'm really concerned of things I've read from our attorney that we're paying for vis-a-vis the insurance company. Him saying that the vote never even really counted because now he's incorporating a 1999 Planned Communities Act rule where 67% of the eligible voters would have to vote. Look at any vote we've had in the recent past. We're not anywhere near those numbers. He put it out there, oh, maybe it was a trial balloon. I think we're all smarter than that. And that's not really what was going on here. And that's why I'm so incredibly disappointed at how this matter has been handled. Again, I've put my, and he says, well, most of the community is against short-term rentals. I know there are a certain percentage are, but have we seen any data besides anecdotal evidence? Show me the numbers of how many noise complaints have been actually leveled. The 2022 survey that I filled out and that is on the membership site had 39 questions, and I just reviewed them to make sure I was not misspeaking. Out of those 39 questions, not a single one said, are you for or are you against short-term rentals? Again, folks, I've put myself out there. I've got to be authentic. Again, I'm not for everybody. We have a choice, which is amazing, and I'm glad that we do, because this is a consequential election. Again, I've always been told that, Dan, you care way too much, and I do. Guilty as charged. Okay, but I put out my record, my resume. I have achieved a lot not because I've issued things as a mandate and said you're going to do it, because I've collaborated. Okay, that's how I do business. I see this main job as being one of listening to people. I'm trying to bone up on policy. I will if I become a board member. But my main role, your trade leaders are supposed to be ambassadors of truth. I appreciate your time and I look forward to your support. Thank you.
And now we'd like to There goes my alarm. You finished before the alarm, Dan. Good for you.
Oh.
Hold on just a second. I'm so sorry. I know, I'm such a goof.
I've got my clock going.
Okay. All right. Larry Rourke.
Hi, everybody. This is great to see a crowd like this. I think it's been 5 years since we've had an election like this. So it's good to see other people. I'm going to read from some prepared notes because I have some really solid information to provide you on why I want to become a board member and what I can do to help this board. My wife and I moved here about 12 years ago, and most people don't realize it. I'm also born and raised here in the Western North Carolina mountains. We visited numerous gated communities before we came here, both in Tennessee and North Carolina, northwestern Georgia. And we fell in love with this community after we saw all the parks that were surrounding it. And more importantly, when I found out of the management environment that we've got here, leading to a community like this that is debt-free. As soon as we saw all that, we decided to buy here. I'm going to just briefly talk. Most of you have seen my bio. I've got an extensive amount of work experience. I'm going to talk only about that stuff that's pertinent to being on the board. I spent 30 years at Xerox. Began as a manager in materials analytical labs and R&D, solving numerous material failure problems across multiple disciplines. Then was called upon to form corporate task forces to solve critical technical problems across multiple fields and organizations. In later years, worked across functional. Thank you very much. Now, can you hear me better? That was going in and out. Did you catch all that? I hope. In later years, I worked with cross-functional teams that were associated with DARPA and PARC, if you're familiar with those, leading to business management positions in planning and developing new electronic reprographic products for Xerox across multiple product lines. Started several outside businesses at the same time that I did that. So how does this all apply to becoming a director here at Conisty Falls? To our team's successes at Xerox, but also is evident in the work done as a member of the FPC for several years. I see some of the old FPC members here, so you know what I'm talking about. We developed new FPC reporting policies and analytical approaches to answering tasks from the board and more quantitative decision-making. While on the FPC, was assigned a leadership role for renovating the clubhouse. So most of the renovations that you see in the clubhouse, I took the lead on that. And that lead was associated with gathering outside experts to come in, also for bringing a team together inside to evaluate all the options and what we could come up with for solutions. Then we did something unusual. We went out of our way to solicit information. We conducted over 20 group sessions, literally going through this whole clubhouse, showing them what we are talking about possibly doing, and getting input from all those sessions, where we had over 30 plus people that were in each of those sessions. Tom Renke, who was a board member at the time, kept all the notes on all the questions that were asked and all the answers. That leads to the next piece. We even conducted focus groups. We weren't still sitting on just those tours. We also did BOD forums. In fact, Dave Hunter was present at that time. We also went ahead and did surveys. We took all that information, Tom put it all together in a Q&A package that we sent out to the whole community. I see a lot of faces that I recognize that were here when we did that. Eventually became a chair of the FPC, where we developed the A&W and pool concepts. And we also went ahead and made recommendations that we should take the equestrian center, which is now the barn, and use that for space for meetings, et cetera. During my tenure on the FPC, worked with multiple board of directors and board presidents, and by the way, visitors, board presidents, GMs, that's what I was looking for. And I didn't see Jim Whitmore, I was looking for that face. So what does this all have to do with making me a candidate for the board? Well, the experience I have in creating and managing projects, developing teams, creating budgets, problem solving, and advanced planning would help me become a key contributor to the future board of directors. Assuring that we have the capital funds reserves and fully disclosed materials and rationale for new projects with all alternatives explored would be crucial to moving forward with anything that we want to do here in the community. My goal is to capitalize on this background and experience with fact-based and analytical decision-making to assure the community is financially sound now and into the future. As a board member, we'll provide support to the numerous clubs, activities, and amenities while fairly enforcing the community governing documents. This will help preserve my honesty, integrity, and decision-making, listening skills, team building experience, caring for the community and homeowners with knowledge of the community will enable me to be a good director. In closing, and the most important to me, I have learned repeatedly over the years that communication is the heart of all individual and business relationships. To that end, I will strive to assure everyone that we will move toward better decisions, and these projects going forward will go ahead and have the full support of everybody in the community. In simple terms, try and keep the community aware and informed, which should include soliciting feedback. Firmly believe in the unification or utilization of community input, especially the standing committees and their expertise.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you. And now we'd like to introduce Richard Zallinger.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Not bad. Press the button.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay, good. My name is Richard Zollinger, and my wife Gretchen, residential community 5 years ago. We moved from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I had a wonderful career, and I worked at the Central Piedmont Community College for 30 years. And I was the vice president for learning and workforce development. And what we did is we managed 6 campuses, 6 libraries, and built communities. These were learning communities where people from all over the world practically will come for one cause, to either learn or socialize or enjoy the arts. I'm currently in a 1-year term here at the board of directors, and I'm the liaison to the Facilities Partners Committee, which the leadership was given by Chip Webb and now Dan Glasgow. And we just have a very good team, and I hope I have support for me to keep supporting you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. How long do I have to wait before I can have a cocktail? 6 o'clock, I don't know. I'll do my best. So I'm going to start with the first few questions, and then I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Janet. Question number 1, and just a reminder, all of these, as Janet mentioned, were submitted to the CFPOA mailbox by our members. So number 1, the mission of the Conisty Falls Property Owners Association is to promote Conisty Falls as a unique community to current and future members, provide quality amenities, infrastructure, and services, preserve our natural environment, and sustain the association's financial health. Please pick one and share your thoughts on how to support CFPOA's mission. Does you need me to repeat the question? Okay, so we'll start with Dave.
Not surprisingly, as a retired banker, I will focus my comments on sustaining the financial well-being of Conisty Falls. As mentioned in my intro, I served for, I believe, 4 years on the Finance Committee, 2+ years as the Finance Committee chair. And a term that I have used or did use repeatedly in my prior board service was fortress balance sheet. Asset rich, heavy emphasis on liquidity, that being assets that are easily convertible to cash, limiting debt. I believe the only debt we have now, if any, is operating leases on some golf carts and maybe a couple of other miscellaneous things. Financial stability is the cornerstone upon which all of the other value propositions within the mission statement of preserve, promote, protect, so forth, rely. It is the cornerstone. We have millions and millions of dollars of reserves and cash. And a lot of times people came to me and they said, why don't we use that cash to, don't start looking at the clock yet, to defer assessment increases? Well, if you get into the financial statements and you look at the capital expenditures that we have scheduled out over the next 10 or 15 years, the millions of dollars merely a down payment on that spending. And being able to replace capital assets as they depreciate and are retired, be able to pay for them with cash is key to our not having to levy special assessments on our membership. Our emergency reserve was recently tapped to handle the landslide over by the dam. I have a question as to what we're going to do to replenish that and look forward to hearing what the board's thoughts are on the replenishment of that fund. But again, I just think it's so incredibly important that we focus on the financial fundamentals, that we continue to emphasize liquidity, that we provide a robust set of projections, which the Finance Committee does do along with the Treasurer, Bob McGinnis, and the CFO, Joey Tyner, to be able to project out 10 years so that we're not caught unawares and facing financial emergencies. So again, finance as the cornerstone of the other mission points. Thank you.
Dan, do I need to repeat the question? Okay.
Thank you. Armand? I couldn't agree with David more. In terms of sustaining our financial feasibility here and making sure we have strong reserves, which if you went to the budget meeting last year, when we were looking at the new budget that was going to be proposed, they've gone from, our total reserves have gone from somewhere in the 8 million figure down to the $6 million figure. I've been, as I said, I've been studying all these procedures, and one of the things, and I have to give credit to David, when he found out I was going to be running, he told me, you need to read this RSM report, which is basically a survey or trends in 200 different clubs throughout Florida to understand what the trends are. And I've studied that. I've read it multiple times, and costs are going to be increasing, you know, as we've seen here. We saw that, you know, and I'm all for that. We are paying a living wage to our employees. They do a phenomenal job here, you know, and it went up to $16.40. You know, in Pennsylvania County, I'm not really sure that's a living wage, but it went up from $15, a 9% increase. One of the things that, you know, somebody asked me, are you one of these guys, a new guy that comes here and wants to change everything? No, part of being here is the charter was preserve mountain charm. And I'm sorry, when I drive by now and I miss that grove of trees that I don't see anymore because the green monster's there. And no offense to Boston Red Sox fans. Folks, I voted against it because I didn't think it was, you know, we're a value-added community. I wanted an indoor swimming pool, and I'm glad that's been put on hold until we know that we can afford it. Don't have to take out a loan. You know, I walk through this room all the time. I use the gym all the time. Very underutilized. Okay, did we need to spend $4 million for that? What is it going to be adding? When I come to meetings and I hear hey, we can't, it's tough enough for us to sustain operations here and keep this fully staffed. Well, now we're going to have another building. Mention the landslide. I'm grateful that, we got a different bid from the original $1 million bid for, roughly $400,000. If you're looking at any of the trends that are going to be happening, we're going to have increasing rainfall and intense storms. That's what the reports are saying. How many more of these landslides are we going to be able to sustain? Another issue that's of great concern to me is how much money we are losing in the roughly 30% of lot owners who do not pay their assessments. If you're going at that $2,900 figure for an unimproved lot, and we have about 105 people not paying, that's a lot of money that we're not collecting. And I understand it's going to be work and money to foreclose on those properties, but and those are some of the main things that concern me in terms of our financial health.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, the one I would have picked out of those 4 mission statements is what Dave talked about. So let me go with the second one, which is basically associated with how do we provide the infrastructure, the amenities, and the services. I don't think I need to talk too much about the services because everything that is done for services here is well evident with a staff that hasn't grown hardly at all. So I'm going to leave that to the side, but amenities and infrastructure I will talk about. I spent a lot of years in the FPC, spent a lot of time evaluating the clubhouse. We brought specialists in at that time when we started looking at the clubhouse renovations. And I understand now that we are literally talking about within 5-10 years replacing the old section of the clubhouse. That concerns me with the cost of that, with everything else that we've got going, like the pool and everything, which I'll talk about in a minute. So when we did the renovation of this clubhouse, we brought in experts from around the state to talk about everything that we thought needed to be done. The projection was that electrical was probably the worst of all. The sewer system, the water systems, those with the technology available today could be kept going for a long time. Time frame in the 20 to 30 year time period. Now, when you take a look at the electrical, we repaired all that. So we're all set there now for a while. So the question I've got is why are we even looking at doing something with a 5 to 10 year period when we've still got a pool to decide on? We've got reserves that we need to build on. So I want to make sure, and you heard it in my opening statement, I want to make sure that we take a look at all options, not just jump to a conclusion and move down that path to do something like that. So I want to spend the time, energy, utilizing the people resources that we've got here to take a look at every option possible before we have to replace a structure like this. Pool-wise, let me just talk about that for a minute. We also worked on the pool at that time. If you remember, the pool, we had a proposal by the board through the GM to go ahead and look at doing something like the Highlands community did, which was an indoor pool. We were told that that was just going to run a few $1 million if those of you were here at that time. Well, the next day, I told my wife, we're canceling everything. We're going to go out there. And I met with all the Highlands community admin people. Guess what I found? It cost $7 million to do that with donations that they had of somebody that put in and $1.5 million on it. And they would never do that structure again because the maintenance costs are so high. And the pool size was less than what ours is. And that's what they're stuck with now. So I want to make sure that we are making the right decisions here. And I'm almost out of time. So I'm using those 2 examples, but I'm going to apply that to everything that we've got here. I want to make sure that financially we can move forward correctly and that we know every alternative. And guess what I want to do? I want to make sure you as part of the community, just like I did with the clubhouse, that you're part of that decision-making process,
Larry,
providing the Q&A to us. Thank you.
Larry, that's strike 2. Do not make me come down there. All right. Respectfully, Before you begin, Richard, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. The way I will continue to support the board is for the promotional part, which the promotional part really translates in taking care of our assessments. The first one is we need to take care of what we have. Like David mentioned before, we need to preserve what we have. We have wonderful trail whales, we have wonderful pools, we have 4 lakes, but we also have a very stable, good position budget with great investments. And we also have over 100 employees that work here that help us live here. And so that will be my first focus point. The second focus point will be to remain relevant. And what I mean by that is the community around us is changing. And we want to be a choice of a place where people want to reside. And what that means is we need to look at our demographics. For example, we have now many, many more younger families with children that weren't here 7 years ago. Well, what accommodations do we need to do to remain relevant? Do we need to have a new playground? Do we need to expand the playground to other areas? These are some of my thoughts. And the last one is the strategic planning. We do have a group that does strategic planning for us, but we need to start having conversations around where we as a family want to be in 15 years.
I believe that was just the first question. Okay, so question number 2. The board's 4 operating principles are balance owner priorities, take care of what we own, plan for our future, and build strong positive relationships. Can you speak to these operating principles and share how you will enact them should you be elected to the board? And we're going to start the 3 minutes with Dan.
Thank you. To start with build, I know there's this conception with some people that think that Conisty Falls is where all the rich people on the top of the hill. Okay, I've never encountered that in town. I'm part of the scholarship program. Today we got to award $60,000 to Blue Ridge Community College because of your generosity. I think Richard talked about building a greater sense of, not community just within here, but to the greater area. And that's how we do things like that. And I would continue for us to do that type of research, continue to make sure we have strong support for that scholarship program. We're supposed to build relationships here. That's, I know, again, I've put it out there that I've been very honest about how I feel about everything. I will work in a professional manner with any board member. If I'm seated on that board, you have my word. Okay? I am a professional. I will do my job. I put my personal biases to the side. I don't have to love everybody in order to work effectively for the good of this community. Planning, again, it's taking things into accountability. What does everybody want? And again, I think we both talked about, myself and Richard, in terms of bringing different people in. And that's what we need to do. We need to have input when we're having our planning. Again, with the pool, it's come up during the board meetings when we're talking about the budget. Do we want the pool or not? Do we have the money to plan for this? And balancing competing priorities, to me, that's a major one. When I think about the basket here, or the bundle of amenities, right? We're not a cost-cutting community, we're a value-based community. Okay, I equate it to, you go to the market and you put some vegetables in a basket and somebody says, hey, Bob, I'll take the zucchini. I don't like zucchini, I'll take the red onions. You pick and choose what you want to do here. And we all do not have the same priorities. Okay, that's why we need open discussion. We used to have something called member info. It's one of the stated committees. I don't know if that still exists. If it went away, I can't find any information about it. That's something I'd like to bring back in so we can bring everybody in and talk about what our competing interests are in the community.
Larry?
Got me timed, right? Balancing owner priorities is pretty straightforward. All of us are unique. We're all bringing something to the party. It's different than oh yeah, it's different than everybody else. So I believe that we need to make sure that we're soliciting the information from all of you. Your backgrounds, your education, your reasons for being here all have to be part of the equation for us determining where we need to go as a community and how we survive. I want to make sure that we're communicating to you, soliciting the information and getting that information to us, because I think that's one thing that is going to help the community grow and expand and be more inclusive. Take care of what we own. I've talked about already in regards to the pool, and we've others you've heard talk about the same thing. So you know my feelings on that. Plan for the future. That's critical. You know that we've had a build-out task force. That build-out task force, right now we're at 1,476 homes, including ones under construction. So we're going to be at 1,500. The build-out task force suggested that we're going to be up at 1,800. Well, one of the things that we haven't talked about is how do we plan financially to get there, knowing that those amenity fees that we're going to be using for the next 20 years for that build out aren't going to be available for the next generation. So we need to start prioritizing how we're going to get to that step. Planning for the future, I've talked about, build strong, positive relationships. Again, this goes, I have done nothing but lead task forces and be in charge of almost anything underneath the sun from a technology standpoint. I honest to God believe that that communication is critical, and that team building, working with the board, working with the community is how we're going to succeed as a board, and is going to show you that the CFPOA is working on your behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I mentioned before, at Central Piedmont Community College, we had over 375 full-time faculty, very passionate full-time faculty, from all the way from the arts to nurses to mechanics to welders, all encompassed. And I was able to provide leadership for us to come to consensus, to agree on goals, and to do some conflict resolution in a very nice mannered way, and not on the social media platform, but in person when we see each other and we meet each other. And so that would be my way I would support the board.
The board operating principles made their first appearance at Conisty Falls in October of 2015. Not as the board operating principles, but rather as the principles governing the development of the Conisty Falls budget. I was chair of the finance committee at the time. We were getting ready to present the budget, and we got into a discussion of, gosh, why do we do this the way we do it? And what are we hoping to accomplish? So the first three bullets of the operating evolved from that discussion: balancing owner priorities, taking care of what we own, planning for our future. They became the board operating principles when I served on the line, and if memory serves me correctly, I believe Shirley Hallblade spent a lot of time wordsmithing that, and Mary Freudenberg, I believe, was board president when they were ultimately adopted as the board operating principles, and I believe Janet Saucier might have been involved with that as well. Balancing owner priorities and building positive relationships are intimately connected. To balance owner priorities, you need to know what those priorities are. You need to seek the input. You need to open our discussions, negotiations, considerations to the light of day and gather feedback from all components of our membership across the spectrum. Balancing on our priorities deals with the fact that every one of us gets up every day with a different set of priorities, capabilities, competencies, abilities to address financial challenges. It's soup to nuts around here. We have to keep that in mind as we move forward in this community. Taking care of what we own, we can expect our reserve budgeting to increase over the years as we increase the level of capital assets that we have within the association. We have to do that. Planning for our future. What does the next generation want? Where are we deficient? Where are there opportunities for improvement? And how do we begin to address that strategically within our various permanent committees and processes within the association? And again, building positive relationships, trying to find a way to engage membership on a consistent, regular, open basis to make sure that our members feel really good about how things are working around here and the processes in place to help us get things done. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. On to question number 3. While it is not currently a requirement for board candidates to serve on a Coniston Falls Permanent Committee, what value did you personally experience by serving on a permanent committee before running for this board election? And we'll start with Larry. 3 minutes.
Wow.
Is this working? Okay. Well, I spent several years with the FPC, which I think I've already talked to. So how do I answer that again without boring you? I firmly believe that the FPC is one of the more important permanent committees that we've got here. This is the committee that's responsible for making decisions. So let's take a step back. The board tells the FPC that they want something done in this time period. Could be a new asset, could be, for instance, replacing the children's set at the Atagahi Park. Then they go out and they figure out, well, what's the answer to that? Well, when I was on the FPC and when I was chair of the FPC, we put some new processes in place to do that. One of the things that we've got now is you can go ahead and pull off online a list of every asset that we've got here in the community and what the plans for that are over time. So if you ever want to know where we are at any point in time and what's being planned by the FPC, that's where you go to find out. And then one of the things that you will find happening when the FPC takes that on, it's their responsibility after that to look at every alternative and option that they have before they make a recommendation to the board. Part of where I'm coming from, which I did with the renovation of this clubhouse, I want to make sure that we're all involved in making that decision. All the time, regardless of the financing level that is. That means just not the 350K. I'd like to see us do that with even the 100K below that limit that we've got, so that the board is involving everybody in the community. And that's what I'm striving for, and that's what the FPC will do today.
I think the question was whether or how important it was for a future board member to be a committee before. Is that correct?
The question was, while it's not currently a requirement for board candidates to serve on a Coniston Falls Permanent Committee, what value did you personally experience by serving on a permanent committee before running for this board election?
So I can talk about myself because that happened to me. I was asked to fill an alternate position with under Chip Webb when we did the work on the facilities master planning. And this community is very big and very complex, and there are very administrative processes that are very established and very complex. And what has helped me is to be exposed to a committee first for a year and get to meet people and see how the command or the channels of strategies raise up. And now I have the pleasure of serving on the board, and I am on the other side evaluating these recommendations and understand and can appreciate the work of all of our committees that are doing for us.
The permanent committees are the eyes, ears, arms, and legs of the board. Each committee operates under a charter, a permanent committee charter, which outlines their various general responsibilities. Each committee also responds to charges from the board to update or expand the facilities master plan, to prepare the budget, to update, expand, reconsider the strategic plan. It is really the guts of the operation on the board side in the governance of this community. It's very, very important. It's wonderful training. I thought I really understood this kind of stuff coming from a 32-year banking career at a fairly senior level at doing budgeting and so forth. I learned a bunch from Ken Franzen, Jim Ungaro, and others my first year on the finance committee. It's wonderful training. It's the breeding ground for future board members. As a matter of fact, I've been thinking about the fact that we're going to have to appoint a 7th member of the board once the board is seated in August. My recommendation to the is going to be we ask the board advisory group for recommendations. The board advisory group are chairs of the permanent committees. They work with these permanent committees day in, day out around the year. They know who the effective members of their permanent committees are. And I think that would be an appropriate way for us to identify, without being presumptuous, I think it's a great way for us to identify the right member to be the 7th member of the board. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm at a slight disadvantage with that question here today. Before, I said out of my concern, I decided to run. I've been here 3 years almost. Optimally, I would have loved to have served on a committee and had that experience here. Doesn't mean it can't come from other places. In terms of strategy, and to me, that and the finance committee are probably the 2 most important committees in the community. In terms of strategy, again, administration trusted me to write DEA's strategic policy when I was in Afghanistan. That took me collaborating with different organizations that weren't, like USAID, they were not traditionally the most law enforcement friendly people. Okay, I had to come up with 5 pillars on how we were going to attack the problem because it was understood that interdiction was not going to solve the problem in Afghanistan. So I've got those types of planning sessions. When I got to the DEA Academy, after I worked in our special operations division, where we strategized how to catch the highest level drug traffickers in the world. I worked in a group called the Dark Side. Everything we did was not for judicial purposes. We had to strategize and work together on how we are going to attack the Hydra, take out the most significant organizations that were out there. When I got to the academy, we changed the entire program. We had a strategy. Strategy is, what is the end game? What does victory look like? And we had a lot of problems when I got to the academy in terms of how students were being trained. And if you've listened to my podcast, if you've seen the things I put out there during this campaign, we had to totally re-envision how we were going to train our agents. And I was spearheading that in terms of teach, coach, mentor, and how are we going to put out the most important product for DEA. Again, they trusted me with 26 different divisions around the country 10,000 personnel organization to change a field training agent program, the most significant leadership and mentorship program in the DEA, because every new agent that goes out is assigned a mentor for 16 weeks. I trained the mentors and I oversaw the 550 members of that unit in addition to my teaching and curriculum writing jobs. And I had to bring in everybody 30 at a time to say, I wrote an administrator a white paper. I had to brief the DEA administrator and I brought in the agents and said, this is what I'm looking at. Okay. Rip it apart. What is good? What's not good? What can be improved? What do we keep? So I do have a lot of planning and a lot of strategic planning experience throughout my career.
Just double checking that I didn't skip anyone. Okay, so question number 4, and we'll start with Richard. Do you agree or disagree that all capital projects should be funded by the amenity reserve fund balance? Or would you support incurring debt for capital projects or a combination thereof?
Oh, sorry.
To be wise, I would do a combination of both.
Hey.
Given that response, I'm going to say ditto. We pride ourselves on being debt-free. It's usually a good thing. Sometimes it doesn't make much sense. I remember when we were talking about the activity and wellness center that we were going to build over by the pool a few years ago, Larry did an outstanding job helping us prepare and plan for that. And there was a notion of actually financing that with a combination of debt and equity. And there was tremendous pushback on that, beginning with the finance committee. Being free from debt is a cultural tradition. It's a World Heritage Site when it comes to Conisty Falls. But there are times when financially it doesn't make sense. Two commitments from two separate banks for very low cost term financing, 15-year financing, no balloon, no special assessment, being paid all out of the cash flow from the amenity reserve. Chances are that had we incurred that debt, we would either be paid off by now or well on our way to paying it off. We had the same challenge back in 2014 when we looked at the issue of replacing this clubhouse. How many of you were here in 2014? It was an existential crisis at Conisty Falls. Friendships ended. Neighbors stopped talking to each other. Okay. It was an $8 million loan with a special assessment of about $415 per year per front door. And it got voted down by a significant margin. I will tell you, in my personal opinion, that's one of the big mistakes we've made, because if you flash forward, we've spent close to $8 million in renovations and in building the activity and wellness center. And instead of having a 10-year-old state-of-the-art clubhouse, we still have a 50-year-old clubhouse that we're going to have to deal with sometime in the future. So that was one of those things where our tradition and our culture kind of got in the way of common sense. So I've done lots of financial packages. I just ran out of time, but I'm going to claim some Larry Rourke's time. There are times when it makes sense to incur a reasonable amount of debt depending upon underwriting and repayment ability of the association.
Not with today's interest rates. Again, everything has got to be looked at. I'm not going to stand up here and promise you all that, yeah, we're absolutely never going to have to borrow any money. My main concern, again, I've seen our overall reserves dropping. You know, what's going to happen when we're at build out? Okay. What is going to happen when we're not charging that large assessment for people to come in here moving into Coniston Falls? Again, I would rather see a start with accountability in terms of going after those who refuse to share in the sacrifice that the rest of us are doing. I feel I said in that video I put out that I will be disinclined to vote for things like new amenity facilities. I'm not talking about road structures, et cetera. I'm talking about, you know, things that we may or may not need anymore. Until we make a serious, determined effort to recoup some of those monies that we're losing. I've been researching and I understand that there are statutes and limitations on liens, and it's going to take some money to, you know, have to foreclose on some of these properties. But again, we are losing, look at all the money that we are losing every single year. What have we lost in the last 10 or 20 years? So I will not say that, you know, absolutely under no circumstances, we're not going to, you know, if we have another 2 or 3 landslides, right? I can't say, honestly say, we're not going to have to not borrow money.
Well, I'll ditto Richard. Let me explain a little. I moved here because it was debt-free. Do you know how unusual that is in mountain gated communities? That's an asset that we have. It'd be nice to maintain that. But on the other hand, if we absolutely have requirements to replace, for instance, this clubhouse, if all of a sudden that turned around, then where are we going to get? We went ahead and did it one time where we borrowed from the amenity fund. If you remember fiber optic on the west side, that worked. By the way, I think the payback on that was supposed to be 7 years, Dave. We did it 3 years. We finished that. So we could do something like that again. But when it comes to the clubhouse replacement, if we have to do that, that's a high cost to us. If the market for borrowing is there, which it was, as Dave talked about with the banks that we had originally when we were going to replace this clubhouse, well, yeah, that's probably a good opportunity. That's good money. But right now with these interest rates, no way. So we've got to wait for the timing, and we've got to make sure that we've got the correct approach for how we're going to get there over time. And what I mean by that is this clubhouse, is there anything we can do to prolong the life? Or are there real justifiable reasons for replacing this clubhouse? Because that's the real heavy cost that we've got in this community. I could talk about some of the other assets that we've got to replace. And things like the firehouse is going to be available in a few years. We need to get the admin building upgraded. We need to go ahead and figure out how we're going to get maintenance upgraded a little. So we've got some other items that aren't on the target list right now. And with that firehouse coming about, which is still going to cost us, we own the land, but the building we don't. So the firehouse, the fire community, they'd have to make a decision when they replace the firehouse to go ahead and allow us to buy it. Who else is going to buy it? So we've got leverage there. But that's something we've got to plan for. And you've heard me talk about the reserves. We absolutely have to replace those reserves first.
Thank you.
Thank you again, gentlemen. With that, I will turn the next set of questions over to my colleague, Janet.
The next question is, what is your position on the replacement of the current pool, the addition of an exercise indoor pool, redesign and enlargement of the pool deck area to include a children's splash zone and additional social gathering areas? And we will begin with Dave Hunter.
I will object to the characterization of the splash zone as a children's splash zone. That's where you'll find me if and when we build this pool. Look, the pool has been there since forever. We've looked at replacing it. We solicited bids, did all sorts of design work. When Larry says that he went over to Toxaway, I think it was, or wherever it was, Highlands, I'm a great listener, as you can tell. He researched this stuff just from A to Z. We're going to have to deal with it at some point. I applaud this board's decision at the suggestion of the Finance Committee to defer that replacement until such time as our amenity reserve is sufficient so that we are not exposing ourselves to unanticipated undue financial risk. So it all needs to kind of come together. Indoor pool, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm not much of an aquatic athlete. I know that there are people here that would love to have that. I think it's something that as we look at, we're going to have to go through our regular planning and research processes. We're going to have to involve the committees, the facilities planning committee, the finance committee. We're going to have to consult with the strategic planning committee. What are the demographics telling us about the demand for this type of a facility, an aquatic costs associated with maintaining it? What percentage of our members are going to use it, and for how long, and what are the operating expenses, and so on and so forth. So I think it'll take a real comprehensive examination. It's something that does, I think, obviously need to be upgraded / replaced. But it'll take some real planning and organizing on the part of this community before we get to a pretty tight presentation for member consideration. Thank you.
As I said earlier, I was more apt to want to have that indoor swimming pool, that lap pool. I love to swim. I would love to be able to do it in the wintertime. The locker rooms obviously need a lot of work. I much would have rathered us have concentrated on that project than something such as the A&W facility. Again, I felt like the pool would have been value added. That particularly the indoor. That would have given us something that we don't have, and we can exercise year round if you do want to go out there and swim. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we renovated this clubhouse 6 years ago. There was another grand opening of it. I've heard people say the clubhouse is crumbling. Well, if it was crumbling, would we be allowed in here? I don't think so. Again, I echo Dave's sentiment that we have to look at everything. And I said earlier, I did applaud the board's decision to not move forward with that project until we knew absolutely certain that we could go ahead and afford it. But I do think ultimately that is something we definitely will need to look at. I don't know so much about the deck expansion. I'm not completely sold on that. But I would like to see that indoor covered pool for the wintertime.
I feel a little different. First of all, let me give you some facts. When we studied the pool back 6, 7 years ago in the FPC, what I remember is that after dealing with a lot of the engineers outside the community, dealing with Spence and Earl at the time, we are going to have to be prepared to probably spend about $300K if one of those major pumping systems goes. I expect that within 5 years, if we don't replace it, we're going to have to spend that money. So the question is, what do we do to get there? Dave went ahead and stated a lot of the things that we had talked about back in those years. One of them was that enclosed pool. One of the things that we did is we sent people out to every community in Western and Northwestern North Carolina and also into South Carolina to find out those communities that have those enclosed pools, what do they have to say about it? Even Brevard Racket Club. They would not do it again because of the maintenance cost. If I remember, Jordan, wasn't it? Every one of those said, no, we would never build an indoor pool again. Now, what the FPC has come up with is that it might be feasible to go, and I haven't seen the details, so I have to back off a little. But if we enclose with some sort of a non-portable unit or something that is very low cost, the lap pool, that might be reasonable. But where we have to maintain the environment, that's where the cost goes out of sight. And oh, by the way, a sliding enclosure, which is what everybody wants, the maintenance on that, we actually went there to Highlands, my wife and I, and we talked to the people that did the maintenance. And you should see what they have to do to maintain that. It's a full-time job. I don't think we want to spend that kind of money. So we need a pool. There's absolutely no question. Splash zone, I don't care. What I do care about is making sure that we've looked at every option possible, as you've heard me talk about today, to make sure that we've got the right approach and we've got some quantification and data community. And I'm looking for every one of you to be part of the solution for what we end up with there. Thank you.
I too would support looking at pools and looking at the financing aspect of what we need to do to start the pool process. I can't really speak to which part. Of course, a year-round pool makes a lot of sense for us that live here now year-round. But I think we need to reevaluate what features we would like to do or to have in some of the response I made before about being relevant and taking care of our younger family, and we might end up with a wet bar or something like that.
Our next question comes from a community member who asks, our neighborhood dynamics and culture are changing as more young families move to the area and to Conisty Falls, and more families own more than one home. The writer used the word bilocational, which we interpreted as owning more than one home. What is your long-range vision, and how can the POA best serve its members inclusively now and into the future? And we will start with Dan, I believe.
That's a great question. Whoever put that in, I would, being on the younger end of the generation here, you know, I would like to see us have a little more diversity in terms of the age groups here, including children. Okay. And I think those are things that we need to, I've heard before that we want to be, you know, there's not a whole lot, let's be honest, there's not a whole lot of diversity in this county, nor in our community. I would like at least some diversity to be in terms of some of the age mix here. Are we looking at, you know, how are we going to encourage more families to come in here? A major challenge will be in terms of transportation. You know, will people want to bring their kids here to raise their children here, you know, if they can't get them to school, or if they're going to have to drive them to school? And I think that's where a membership information committee or something along that lines, where we could have that bridge between the administration, the governing board here, and what the membership actually wants, you know, so to listen to you all and get your input as to what we're going to do.
Well, interesting question. Statistically, I think we've had about a 40-some% turnover in the last 5 years. That's significant. Part of that turnover is associated with COVID. Part of that turnover is associated with young families moving in to get away from the city environments. We used to have 2 homes. I'm getting at the age where I don't want to travel back and forth, and I'm a mountain person. That's where I lived all my life throughout the country. I'd rather spend my time up here. So when you take a look at I think we've got 110 kids in the club right now that are listed, our families that have got kids. That is where we're going to get the information on where we move relative to that, because that was a specific part of the question. Again, going out and soliciting that information. What we need to do with it is strategically take a look at the demographics and where we're going to be going 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out. And don't forget about that build out that I mentioned. So we need to go ahead and strategically look at gaining that market information, determine how people are coming here, the reasons they're coming here, and what are the demographics associated with them over a function of time. Thank you.
I'm not sure there is much we can do about family homes, and one of is here in Conisty Falls. But I do think that's just the characteristics of Western Carolina, where, you know, if you're here in January and February, it's nice and peaceful. And as you have seen or read, I'm the current chamber president for Transylvania County, Brevard, and we have the same problem supporting small businesses, where there is just either you can't find workforce or you don't have enough people that warrant for you to have a small business. And so I think that's a very much long-range Western Carolina problem that we alone can really not attack.
I remember my father 30 years ago dealing with the same issue when he was on the board with the old timers and the veteran Canestians sitting around and complaining about the shift in demographics and how it's going to impact the community. And here we are 30 years later, we're going through it. We're going to continue to go through this. One of the things that the board does is conduct new home buyer surveys and member surveys, and from that they extract demographic data and try and identify the shifts within the demographics, and then see what the various amenity demands and priorities are from those demographics. There's a lot of research that goes into this. Board has a lot of good information on this, and they try and integrate it into our planning processes, whether it's financial or strategic or facilities planning. My wife is actually on the board of the kids club. We had all the little jerks over to the house for the Christmas. I love kids. We had them all over at the house for a Christmas party, and they're delightful. They certainly change the ambiance in any room in which they find themselves. And we have a dedicated group of volunteers that have worked really, really hard, beginning with Elena Harbeck and others that have worked not just to create activities for these kids, but also to integrate their families, make sure they have connections, feeding information back to the board so that we can continue to anticipate this moving forward. These changes are going to happen. The question is, are we going to be able to respond to them, or are we going to have to react to them? You know, I had a professor in college, Stephen Covey. He wrote a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he had this thing called a quadrant that was made up of 4 squares with urgency and importance. And where effective leaders spend their time is in the quadrant where there are important things that aren't urgent. You've anticipated them. You've seen them coming over the horizon. You've seen them coming down the road, and you've positioned yourself to be able to deal with those. That's one of the missions of the board, is to be able to anticipate these changes, these trends, these developments before they happen, and position our community to be able to take advantage of those and meet the evolving needs of our new members and our veteran members as well, balancing the owner priorities. Thank you.
An issue that threatens the viability of Conisty Falls is poor cell phone service throughout the community. While riding or walking through the community, the cell phone coverage and reception is unacceptable. I understand this was identified as a top 5 strategic initiative over 5 years ago. Though there has been some effort to address this issue, there have been no significant results, and the cell phone service continues to be unacceptable. As a board member, how would you plan to address and resolve this cell phone issue?
My God.
Come on, Larry.
Actually, this is right up my alley, technically. I don't know any of the, still remember Jim Thompson, who used to be one of the board members here. He had a task force that I was part of that was dealing with it back then, and that had to have been, and I'm losing track of time here, 9 years ago. There's answers. The question is, what do we want to spend? Now, before I talk about what those options were, let me talk to you about 5G. What people don't realize with 5G that is now coming everywhere geographically around the country, to have 5G work efficiently and effectively, they got to shorten the distance between all the cell towers and basically have more relay stations in there. So they have to saturate the area to have 5G work efficiently. What I don't know is I don't know if anybody on the board has taken a look recently at what those Verizon and AT&Ts that are here now are doing to support the geographic region around here. So that's number one. We got to figure that out. Number two is that we go ahead and try to apply. One thing that I thought about doing years ago is trying to appeal to some of the agencies, federally and state, that are available, that are putting funds out there. And this year, the state and the federal community has got funds available in form of grants. What we need to do is establish somebody that can write grants, because you got to be a good grant writer to get those grants available. So that would be my second approach. Third approach, and it's another technological approach, is you know how we do those of you that golf, you know how we do the satellite communication with those little relay stations on the course? We thought about doing that 7 to 9 years ago. It's viable. It can be done. I just don't know what the cost is today compared to where we were. So there's answers available for this.
I agree. There are answers. I think we just need to be a little more patient. I just read the other day that Transylvania County received some grant money, federal grant money for Homeland Security and Safety, first responders. And we were talking in the board to see whether we could maybe tag on some of these efforts so that our communication can get improved here. I myself called star 411 and talked to Verizon, my carrier, and they sent me for free a box, which works very well. So that's just something you might want to look at. And I think it's a statewide effort where Senator Edwards is looking at some of the Western North Carolina communication silos that we have to see what kind of federal monies could be made available. So there are answers out there, but we may have to be a little more patient.
If memory serves me correctly, there were two elements included in the issue about technology and lack of coverage within Coniston Falls. There is cell phone coverage, and there was also internet connectivity. Now, we took care of internet connectivity back in 2019 when we installed fiber optic on the west side of this community. And we became the first community in Western North Carolina that was fully internet capable with either fiber optic or high capacity coax. The abiding frustration, of course, is with cell phone coverage. Larry has forgotten more about technology than I ever knew. But I do recall that when we were talking about fiber optic, we did. The number one reason people really like living in Coniston Falls is because of the natural beauty and the connection to the environment. Survey after survey confirms this. Not sure we would be able to maintain that to the degree we like if we had to put 5G towers every 50 or 60 yards along the road. But again, I will defer to Larry. With regards to a cell phone tower, this has been talked about since forever. And it's frustrating because it's an awful lot like trying to push a string. You know, you really can't effectively do that. You need a willing partner to go out and build the tower that then can lease space to the various providers and thereby increase the coverage. That's something we really can't control. I would encourage the board and our community to consider alternatives as we move forward and as technology develops. I think this is something that is imperative because of safety and security issues, health concerns, being able to reach out and make emergency contact, really important stuff. And I think it needs to be a priority, has been a priority. We've made some steady gains in some areas. There's work to be done in others. Thank you.
An issue near and dear to my heart because my wife is at home working right now. She works full time, and she would not have been able to move here if she was not able to continue working. As a side note for safety, and I just learned this going through the Transylvania County Vision Program, that we toured their emergency operations center. I did not know that regardless if you have cell phone coverage or not, text 911 and we'll go through. That's what they said. Just for anybody, I did not know that. I recall, and I echo Dave's sentiment, you know, if we don't have a willing partner, I recall Jim giving us an update last year on this, specifically with Verizon, where they were talking about where they were kind of scaling back operations in the area. Again, the board is allowed to appoint task forces for short periods of time with a specific mission. And if it hasn't happened already, I think that would be incredibly helpful for us to look at all those things. And again, we have to get the input. Again, as Dave said, how many of us really want, you know, numerous cell phone towers in this community? So again, we have to get a task force. If we can get federal funding and we can go that route and write grants, fantastic. I think we all understand the importance of connectivity in the community.
And our last question, and we will start with Richard, I believe. Should you be elected to the board, will you pledge to place members' priorities ahead of your own personal priorities?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dave?
In 2021, in July, I was approached by several board members who were looking to throw their hat in the ring and serve in board leadership positions. And we sat down in this clubhouse, and in preparation for that, I prepared a 2-pager that I called Dave Hunter Thoughts on CFPOA Board Leadership. And there's probably 20 different, it's an outline, there's probably 20 different sections to the outline. Early on, what I said was the absolute worst reason for the board to move in any specific direction is because a board member wants to do it, or a group of friends of various board members want to do it. If you want to lose your moral authority to serve in a leadership position in this community, act in that fashion. It's something that I have never tolerated. I will not tolerate. What we're having to do is abide by the operating principles, balancing the owner priorities. Everybody, the first thing I said in that outline was, as a board member, you are no better than our most humble member in this community. You have no greater standing than the most humble member of this community. I really believe that. I believe that because of my father, who was a career Marine officer. And he told me, he went on a camp out with us. How much time do I have? I remember back in the day, no, But my dad went on a camp out with us, and I was a patrol leader. And in Boy Scouts back then, you got to be the patrol leader because you were the biggest kid and you could bully other kids. And my dad, on our way home, said, "Son, just a tip." He had just gotten back from Vietnam. He was the executive officer of the 2nd Marine Battalion to ever go into Vietnam back in the early 60s. He said, "I sent men, Marines, into harm's way, potentially to their deaths, and they went. And the reason they went is because they knew that they mattered to me." And so our members need to be first and foremost in our consideration. We should never pursue a path of decision-making based upon personal preference or the influence of friends or family members. Thank you.
Wait, Dan, before you speak, Dave, that was a yes or no answer. That's why I didn't sit there with the timer, just saying. Go right in.
You can't elaborate.
Yes.
Thanks for clarifying.
I'm just kidding.
Amen to what Dave said. And yes, absolutely emphatically, my lodestar will be what is the best thing for this community, not best for Dan Mady's interests. Before you become a leader, when you're developing as a leader, it's about you and your development. When you stand in a leadership position, whether it's in the military, a law enforcement agency, or on this board, it's about other people. It's about servant leadership. Any Simon Sinek fans out here? He wrote "Leaders Eat Last." Well, he stole that from the Marine Corps. Okay, you put your job. I've heard people say, "It's a thankless job." I don't believe in that, and I understand that this is going to be a more or less full-time unpaid job if I'm privileged enough to be able to serve. The thanks I will get is looking in the mirror at the end of the day and say, I know that I put my own personal biases, my own self-interest aside, and I took everybody's input. And again, at the end of the day, the last thing I will say is this the right thing that the majority of the community wants? Again, nobody is ever going to get exactly everything that they want. We all know that's not how the world works. Okay, but if we all know that we have input and that like you talked about your dad, the Marines know, or the community members know that you care about them. If you guys read that letter that I put out a little bit ago, where I gave the speech to the basic agent class that I led in 2014, I told them my center of gravity is their success. I'm accountable for everything that they do, and most importantly, do not do. And I wrote that the most important thing is that they do know that you have their self-interest at heart. I put out that other blog post that I had written where, I had a supervisor. No, you guys rocked the boat. Colin Powell said, when your people stop bringing you problems, it's one of two things. They think you don't care or you can't solve the problem, and both are a failure of leadership. Being a servant leader means that, Lincoln said you can't change human nature. People are going to get lazy in a leadership role, but what you can change is human behavior. There were things I had to do as a counselor at the academy and working crazy hours and didn't want to necessarily have to be there on the weekend. Would much rather have been there with my wife, but those students were looking at me as the face of the DEA, and I was there for them. This is a privilege, not a right, when you sit in one of these hot seats. And you're there to serve, nothing more, nothing less.
I'm not going to give you a story. Resoundingly, yes. Everything I've done for this community as a volunteer for the 12 years I've been here, working on the FPC, other task forces, has been to support the community and do what is right for the community. I intend to draw on this community to make those decisions and to make the right move forward for this community. Thank you.
Thank you again. So that completes the portion of the moderator questions before we use what time is left, which is roughly about 25 minutes. Before we start audience questions, I'd like to first thank the candidates again for sharing their viewpoints and the ideas with all of us today. Second, I want to remind everyone about the timeline for this year's election. There are 3 positions available, as you all know, on the upcoming board roster, and 4 candidates are running. A few dates to keep in mind. Election ballots will go out to members on June 26th. All ballots are due back to the administration office by 5 p.m. on July 24th. They go out on June 26th, due back at 5 p.m. July 24th. The newly elected board members will be announced on July 26th after the ballots are certified by the board, the CFPOA's election committee. And then the annual meeting will take place on August 3rd. In the meantime, should any of the members have a follow-up question after today's forum, or if you wrote in and did not have your question asked today, we encourage you to reach out to the candidates individually. And now that we still have 24 minutes left, anyone with a question for the candidates, please step up to the microphone in the center of the room and kindly state your name and present your question to either one or all of the candidates. And the 3-minute time limit per question will still apply, just to be courteous to others who wish to ask a question between now and 6 p.m. Wow, no one's getting up? Come on, be brave.
Hi. Hey, thank you all. My name's Dawn Kuhn, and I was a renter for 6 years before I bought 4 years ago. This has nothing to do with the rental. My question, and you brought it up, and only you, is that there's over 100 properties that are delinquent in paying their assessments. And so I'm just going to go up and say, we're paying $4,000 a year. If that's 100 houses, that's $400,000 a year that's not being collected. I know that's high because some of them are lots, but that's a lot of money. And I feel like we're being punished. So how do you collect that money? What are you going to do about that? Anybody can answer that.
This, as we looked at the future growth of the community, we believe that private lots are going to drive that growth, and 105, 110 of them are past due in their assessments. The number cited of $5,000 or $6,000 to foreclose on a property is accurate. Let's suppose we invest $650,000 and go out and foreclose on all of these properties. What happens to them? They come back into inventory at CFPOA. These are lots. These are not houses. These are lots. Nobody's going to be paying the assessment on them. The association doesn't pay assessments on association-owned lots. So those lots are out there. They're past due in their assessment, some of them a number of years. We actually leaned a lot of them and decided not to move on them. And should the owner ever decide to go ahead and sell the lot, they would need to pay off their past due assessment. And that's when the money would come into the association. So these do not become revenue producing units should we foreclose on them and take them into association inventory. The number of $5,000 or $6,000 is if the foreclosure is unopposed. If it's opposed, it ratchets up significantly. I prefer to look at it kind of as a hidden reserve. It's something that's out there. It's what we used to call in the banking business a bluebird. If somebody decides to come in and sell their lot and we get that assessment revenue, that's great. Didn't cost us anything to do it. Weren't at any risk of losing that assessment revenue. So This is something that has been association practice for a long time. There's good, sound business and financial reasons for that being the practice. Most importantly, as I said, if they are foreclosed upon by the association, taken into inventory, they don't generate any incremental revenue to the association.
I would make the point that they're not revenue producing right now. Right? And if we are going to have to spend some money in order to foreclose on these properties, to me, why do we have rules and regulations if we're not willing to enforce them? Why are we letting 1/3 of those lots, those lot owners, basically enjoy all the beauty that we get to, all the amenities here, including the brand new A&W facility that will open up soon? It's a matter of principle to a certain degree. Why are they allowed to thumb their noses at us and take advantage of us in that manner? Right? And if you start foreclosing on properties, will some of them wake up and say, oh boy, it's not business as usual in Coniston Falls anymore? You know, Jim mentioned those folks are paying their taxes, county taxes, because they don't want to lose. They know the county will come in and do something if you're not paying your taxes. But they look at us and thumb their noses at us. It's really an affront. And again, why bother having all these rules and regulations if we'll let a third of the people that own those lots flaunt it? Right? And could we not resell some of the lots?
Yes, my name's John Kratt, and what I want to talk about is an indoor pool. I was chief engineer and chief maintenance resort. That we had one indoor pool, we had 3 outdoor pools. That one indoor pool cost us more money to run than 3 other outdoor pools and 2 spas. You're talking about how do you get the moisture out of there, how it deteriorates the building and everything around it. We have beautiful clear lakes. We have one little beach down there at Atagahi that if you ever go there is packed. Children have fun. So why don't we invest a little bit on some beach instead of, well, let's build a new pool. That's all I got to say.
I guess there's no response to that. Hi.
I think we've all stated that it would be something that we'd have to look at. And again, if it's going to be financially feasible, we're not going to, there are probably a couple of people here that do swim in the lake during the winter time. And there's one right there. I was thinking of somebody else who I don't see right now, but again, we have to look at, is it financially feasible? And is it something that, the community is actually going to want? And I do applaud the decision to put it off until we could actually afford it.
Let me just make one statement. One of the places that we lived when we were splitting our time here was in Florida, in a place called On Top of the World. And it's about 5 times larger community size than what we have here home-wise. Actually, it's more than that now. But anyway, they had an indoor pool. They still do. In the winter, it was hardly used. So one of the basic, if the community said we need that indoor pool, I would argue we're going to have to do some solid research to find out how many people would literally use that in the middle of winter here in the mountains if they don't in Florida. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Yes. So, hi, my name is Nancy Zapp. My husband and I bought here 2.5 years ago. We love it here. Unfortunately, I'm a reluctant snowbird because my husband also loves palm trees and hates the cold. So when we're in Florida, in Port St. Lucie, we live in a community with the POA. I served on the POA for 5 years as secretary. All of our meetings were held openly with 48 hours at least notice. When we came here and I went to my first quarterly board meeting to come to a board meeting, I was so surprised to discover it was like going to an annual meeting. The president and the general manager spoke and discussed what had happened in the previous quarter, what decisions they had made, what accomplishments the board had made. But evidently, everything is done here behind closed doors. In Florida, it's by law. We have no choice. The Florida Sunshine laws apply also for communities, and and the board cannot meet privately except in certain conditions. I know evidently North Carolina has different laws. How do you feel as potential board members? Do you think that this is the way to hold board meetings, that none of us know what happens until it's done? Would you do anything about that to try to challenge the status quo if you are elected? Thank you.
Earlier on, I referenced a document I wrote back in July of 2021 about my thoughts on leadership at Conisty Falls. One of the other bullets in there was the fact that this board is vested with broad and deep authority. It can act on any number of issues without a member vote or member input. That is not a best practice. That is not how we want to conduct the business of this association. Just because we can operate in that way doesn't mean that we should operate in that way. I believe in transparency. I could share any number of concerns that I have shared with this and other boards about communication and inclusion of members and engagement of members. You have my pledge that if elected to the board, that transparency, engagement, inclusion, communication will be front and center in our activities. I believe that a first step in doing that is for the board, when it convenes, to sit down and develop an annual board calendar that they publish to the community, showing the dates when the board meetings are going to be held, committing to hosting chats with the board on those months where we don't have board meetings, featuring a permanent committee presentation in each board meeting to educate membership about what happens behind the scenes, how these permanent committees work, and how things get done around here. Push that communication out into the community, because I think what that does is that builds member interest, engagement, and participation in the governance processes of the association. The board can act without involving the community in certain matters. I don't like it when that happens, and I don't believe most of our members do. Thank you.
I agree with Dave. Let me just add a little evidence from my own personal experience. It's not going to work if we aren't open and we don't communicate with each other. Everything that I've talked about tonight, you've heard me talk repeatedly about that. I want to make sure, if I get on the board, that we are doing everything possible to include the membership in what we're doing. I'll be damned if we're going to sit there, if I have anything to do with it, and make decisions without involving the community. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to take every little bitty decision that we make and make you aware of it. But one thing building on what Dave said, I'd like to see us document everything that we do and let that get out into the community and ask for feedback. One of the things that I'll propose, and I haven't even talked obviously to this at all, I'd like to create what is called a listening session where we don't have, who was it, the person was just up here asking that question, where we don't stand up there and tell you what the decisions are, what we did, when we did it, how we did it. And oh, by the way, without telling about all the financial stuff and everything, I want to go ahead and allow you to give feedback to us on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. Get that two-way communication going. It doesn't mean that we have to be in formal meetings. The only meeting that has to be formal and has to be kept exclusive is when the board is in executive session. And that's usually for personnel-related issues. So absolutely support what Dave said in addition to what I have to say.
I certainly would be open to look at other ways for us to spread the communication and improve communication. But I don't think making the board of director meetings public so everybody can attend every other Wednesday for 3 hours is a very good idea. We do have confidentiality agreements we need to sign because sometimes we have to talk about things that needs to stay in the board. And for that, I would keep it the way it is. But again, I would be open to other ways for us to find ways to communicate. And also, please go to our webpage. It's all on there. The minutes are on there. YouTube videos are on there all the way back to 2017. So this information is available, but it's your due diligence to go and find it. Thank you.
One thing that really got to me when I told people I was really concerned and disappointed with the way things were going. And you've all seen what I've put out there, how I feel about transparency. And I've used a term to describe how things have been done here. I couldn't agree more with Dave and Larry that we need openness. One thing that really got to me was when the chat with the board was canceled because it was said we need to do a response to the short-term rental litigation. That response came out several hours before the scheduled chat with the board, which is intended to be a non-agenda and informal meeting with the board. Richard referenced the confidentiality agreement. I've reviewed it because I'm like, why do we need to have this? I understand with things like what took place with that criminal investigation here a couple of years ago needs to be maintained. When I worked in Special Operations Division, I signed a 75-year confidentiality agreement. When I'm 120, I'll tell you what I did to help catch Chapo Guzman. So, but not everything. When I served on the mayor's, I was a civilian advisor to the mayor, the DC Mayor's Veterans Advisory Board. All those meetings were completely open. The confidentiality agreement states that you're not even allowed to know how your board members vote. Say, for example, one of us gets on the board and we want to rerun in the future. Well, you should know, well, Dan, Dave, or Larry, or Richard voted this way. Why does that have to be confidential? I also serve on the Transylvania County Juvenile Crime Prevention Council here in Brevard once a month. Anybody can come into the public and watch everything. And you can see how we vote on the things that are affecting young people in this community. I believe in as much communication and openness as possible.
So we have 2 more people, 2 more questions. So I just want to remind the candidates to try to keep your responses as short as possible so that we can allow for the last 2 questions. Go ahead, Jan.
Hi, Jan Newsom, Okanoa Circle. Initially, I'd like to direct my question to Larry Rourke. As you've been part of many projects within the community, and anyone else may comment if they like. The main theme here today through all the candidates seems to be about communications. The board, in a community like this, the board has many challenges, just the general operating, maintenance, financing, that type of thing. And in a community of this size, there is going to be a lot of controversy. That's can also be a good thing. You get to look at different viewpoints. But one of my main concerns is how our voting procedures are. Our documents allow for a measure to be passed just by the majority of the vote. However, we've got 1,450 homes, maybe 200 lot owners, a possible of 1,600 people that could vote. However, if only, I'll just throw out a small number, if only 500 people vote, a measure can be passed with 251 votes. If we're proposing a sizable project or something of, significant dollar value, it's really not a representation of the membership if a measure gets passed with such a small vote. In many communities, their documents indicate that a certain percentage of vote Dan mentioned something about Planned Community Act somewhat being changed to 67%, which would be a nice number. What I want to ask Larry initially, or someone else that would like to comment, would you be in favor of changing our documents to increase the minimum number of votes we must get in order to pass a measure?
Excellent question. The answer immediately that I'd like to give you is yes. But I don't like to go ahead and make decisions on the fly. If you haven't figured me out yet, obviously I'm an engineer, technologist. I believe in gathering data, gathering information, and gathering feedback from the community to make a decision. So I would entertain that, and I absolutely have read up on that recently. So I agree that I think that we've got some issues, and I think it would be helpful for us to go ahead and look into that.
Yeah, I'd like to add, when we get the results of the surveys, very often it'll say, well, we got 76% in favor, but it's 76% of those that voted, which may really, in the end, be 10% of the total membership. So to pass a $5 million project when we have such little input from the membership.
Well, first of all, I don't believe in surveys by themselves. I used to do market research. One of the things I did inside is I had a business that was a consulting to the ski industry. And so I used to do a lot of primary market research. I don't believe in those. I believe they're a tool. What I would follow up on is exactly what we did for the clubhouse here. I would hold focus groups, and I would bring in outside people to run those focus groups so that we're not biased in doing those. And then I would collect the data individually from listening sessions and other, like when we have a board forum, to invite everybody in to talk about the issue and gather all the negative things. Because when we documented all the negative things here and then put the answers out, guess what? Most of them went away on the clubhouse.
Larry?
So I want to do a combination of all that.
Let me comment real quickly. Coniston Falls is incorporated under the North Carolina Not-for-Profit Corporation Statute, Chapter 55. It prescribes certain voting minimums within an association like ours. If we were to raise the required minimum vote to 67% of our members actually voting, this place would become ungovernable. Point number one. point number two, my experience is when we're getting ready to spend a lot of money, our members become vitally interested. Things that involve a lot of money, and they vote on things that involve changes to longstanding traditions, practices, and operations. So I think that we're well represented as members in the votes that we take on those matters.
I think that shows the importance of why we all need to come out and participate and to vote. Slight disagreement with David. We do have people who are interested, but I've looked at the last 3 votes that we've had for major things for the budget, for that facility. Somebody fact check me, please. We've had about 700 has been the number, somewhere in that range. More or less about half the eligible population of this community has voted for things. And I think that's on all of us. I think we all need to get engaged and understand the issues and to vote. I think we need to do a better job communicating. I saw something where an email came out where it said, hey, if you don't know what's going on at the gatehouse, all the improvements that are being made, it's because you did not read the facilities management plan. Okay, that you can look that up. That is not the way to communicate issues. I understand we have people that don't live here full time. You know, some people don't want to get on the internet or don't read their emails for whatever reason. When we have things of significance, A&W facility, a pool, our budget increases, we need to put that out. Maybe we need to send a letterhead out to the people who don't want to use email, don't want to be on the internet. But it is incumbent upon all of us to exercise the greatest right that we have in America. We need to vote, regardless of who you're going to support up here. Please vote.
Thank you, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now 6 o'clock, and we announced early on we were going to wrap the meeting up. The gentleman here has been waiting quite a while. We're going to take his question, and then we're going to wrap it up. If you still have questions for the candidates, please contact them directly. They would appreciate it very much. Sir, your question.
Craig Wilson, I'll try to be brief. I know everybody's anxious to get going. Back to the beaches. A couple years ago, I came up with a beach creation or beach enhancement plan. I submitted that. It's a written document, about 3 pages, got a site plan for every lake, did Google Earth layouts on it, came up with a cost estimate to create a beach at each of the lakes we have. I submitted that to the Facilities Planning Committee. I don't think either one of these gentlemen were on it at the time. This is within the last 2 years. Ran it by the general manager, a couple board members, Natural Resources Committee, Fishing Club. Nobody took exception to what I suggested we do. So I didn't ask somebody to study it and do all this work. I did the work. And I want to know, and it's basically buying sand like you would buy sand for the traps on the golf course, putting in some kind of retaining wall with some rock to keep it from running into the beach. And it can be done for a couple $100,000 at the most, as opposed to millions and millions of dollars for swimming pools and the rest. And so my question to the 4 of you is, will you take a look at it and will you move this thing ahead? I thought we were going to get the Toccoa Dam Beach done this year, but I guess the landslide happened and that went.
Let me provide a quick answer to that. I just reviewed again, just to be updated today, the facilities master plan. And my understanding is that we have that in the master plan now. We haven't got Wantesca Lake included in that yet. So those are on the docket. Now, it might be a financial issue. I don't know why the board and the facilities plan hasn't moved through to finish those and to get those under construction, but they're on the master plan.
Does anybody else want to respond? All right. Thank you again for everyone coming out tonight. Have for the rest of your evening.